do what are called capstone senior projects at Spectrum, which is up in Elk River by the Home Depot. They have 3 different buildings they've taken over. And one of the requirements, because they're sponsored by the Volunteers of America, is these kids have to do this volunteer work. And they do a project where they do a fund drive or an awareness campaign of some kind of organization. There were a lot of dog rescues. I said, oh, no way, another dog rescue. But there was one, and you're going to see actually part of one Sunday. There was a girl that came in. She was from Colombia. She'd been adopted. And she had a presentation about Pro-Life Action Ministries. Her mother, she found out when she was 12 or 13, her adoptive parents gave her a folder that talked about her birth mother in Colombia. Her mother had been raped, became pregnant. She wondered whether she should, abort the baby or not. She decided to adopt this girl. Her name is Sage. And she just talked about, she's just an articulate, beautiful girl. She does sidewalk counseling even at Planned Parenthood.
Wow.
So she's a very brave girl. She had a little YouTube video which told her story. It's like 4 minutes, so we're going to see that in the service on Sunday, being Pro-Life Sunday. But, I did ask her at the end, I said, have you ever been in contact with your birth mom? And that's when she kind of welled up. And it didn't sound like she had ever really talked to her, but she gave the story about when she was 12 or 13, she got this brochure, this folder that had pictures of her mom and the story about her mom. And at the beginning of her presentation, she had a picture up, and we weren't sure who it was. And it almost looked like her, the girl, and it was her mom. And she said, yeah, she says, I'll know what I'll look like when I'm 21. So that was a very sweet, wonderful testimony, I thought. Very outspoken Christian girl. And then there was another girl who, she said her mom was infertile, but then the doctor gave a surprise that she was going to have twins. They gave birth to the twins. And this girl that gave the presentation was very, bright, beautiful. The other one had Down syndrome.
Oh.
And the doctors told the mother at that point, why don't you adopt that baby out? Because your lifestyle isn't going to accommodate you, with having her around. And the mom said, no way, we're keeping that baby. And this girl is just saying that the girl is just the light of her sisters, the light of her life, and of her family. And it was, once again, obviously a Christian girl giving a really strong testimony. There were some other presentations which were on LGBTQ, T, and that was, you accept that, that they're giving this presentation, and it is probably true that a lot of youth that are identified that way are homeless, and they do have places for them, which is good. So, anyways, that's what I was doing, and one thing I remember being there all day, I said, boy, I forgot how long days are.
How old were these kids?
There's all high school seniors.
Seniors, yeah.
Yeah, and they have to do it to graduate, but it's up front. This is what you have to do. And so there are, I don't know how many, but there are kids in 11th grade that don't want to do it, and they transfer. Too much work, And really, most of the kids, when we asked them, they said, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. And usually things aren't. So, today we are in chapter 16, and we're going to review chapter 15, went way back a month ago, if you remember. Remember back a month ago?
Oh, yeah. I have a steel trap memory.
I remember when I was teaching at PAC and we had to give a state test it was given to the 8th graders, and it was all the science they learned in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I told one of the girls that, she says, I don't even remember what we did yesterday. So, being in the wilderness, Swindoll talks about your wilderness goes with you. Each of us have had his or her own wilderness cycle. Some struggle with a quiver full of small children at home. Others have no children. Your test is not related to the home at all. It may be connected to your employment. With some, it's wrestling with relationships. You're abrasive and have difficulty with people. That's why God keeps you with people and grinds away so that your long-standing Egyptian habit might be altered. With others, it's finances. You live continually under the gun of insufficient funds. With others, it's a problem indeed related to academics or school issue. That's your wilderness. Years ago, while speaking at a college in Florida, I had a question answer session and several students. As we wound up the session, late that evening, one student added a question that set me back in my chair a bit. He asked, what's it like in California? Is it really as good as I hear? Is anybody ever tested in California like we are in Florida? He was serious. It was so typical of how some idealistic students view their world. And it's always, the grass is always greener too. If I can just get to some other place. But God's going to keep you, like somebody said once, God won't let you out of 2nd grade into 3rd grade until you pass 2nd grade. And I know dealing with a granddaughter that's at St. Thomas, and she's thinking it's not all that she wanted, maybe she should transfer to some other school. And I'm thinking, don't throw away all the scholarships. Okay, so a month ago we talked about, one of the questions we talked about, did Pharaoh die with the army in Red Sea? And the Bible in Moses does not say, it only says that God would be honored through Pharaoh. So the Bible doesn't really say specifically one way or the other. And we talked about that it's probably not a hill to die on. That was something that Tom always used to say, this isn't a hill to die on. So we're not going to make a new denomination around that one. And then when they got across, remember, they sang the song, Moses' song, which is also referred to in Revelation, the horse and the rider as he thrown into the sea. Miriam makes an appearance, and it's interesting, after about 80 years, we see her again. We see her written about again. And she leads the women with tambourines. We talked about, so where did they get all those tambourines? I don't know, maybe they made them, or they all took their... And remember to take your tambourines when you go. They're going to need them. And of course, the New Testament application in 1 Corinthians and Hebrew 11, it says, these things are written as examples to us. They have a deeper meaning than just the surface. They're examples to us, not to lust like they did, and not to complain like they did. So comparatively, it was easy to get the people out of Egypt, and it was harder to get the Egypt out of the people. And that's certainly true, in our lives. Certainly true when people get saved as adults. There's a lot of baggage that needs to be cleared out. And I refer back to, I remember Ed Folden giving that talk on Nehemiah, and he talked about the wall. He said the first thing they had to do was to get all the rubble cleaned up before they could build. And that's true of people's lives too. Sometimes before you can build, you need to get rid of all of the baggage that's laying around. So it was a quick turn though. Okay, here they are all singing happy, and then it went from grumbling to first of all, it was grumbling on the other side of the Red Sea, then it was praise, and then, once again, as we're going to see today, grumbling reappeared again. You know, and one of the stories, or one of the phrases too, is, who is like our God? You know, there were many of gods in Egypt, hundreds, thousands. None were like God. Ra wasn't, and all the others. Well, 3 days later, as we're going to see, there is a water shortage. You know, that's understandably hard for everyone and their livestock.
Yeah.
So then they come to the bitter water at Marah, but God heals the water. He throws a tree in. We talked about what some of that was. Some of the Hebrew rabbi traditions was somebody found a branch from the tree of life and threw it in. Well, it seems a little far-fetched, but it was probably just a regular miracle. It wasn't anything medicinal probably in that tree or bark. So they take these baby steps now in the desert. And Deuteronomy 8 explains why God took them through the desert. It was to try them and to see what was in their heart. We talked about the phrase, none of these diseases. If you follow the Lord, none of these diseases will follow you. God gave rules that they didn't understand, but 4,000 years later we understand that the germ theory of disease was not understood by the people. There were no microscopes. A lot of, just myth about what caused diseases, and why certain foods were unhealthy, and why sanitation stops the spread of sickness. You know, they were instructed, if you got to do a job, you go outside the camp, you carry your own spade all the time, dig a hole, bury it. They didn't have indoor plumbing, obviously. And then they reached Elam, which is, a name that we see often in like churches or nursing homes. And it was an oasis. And one of the things there is that after every Mara in our lives, there will be an Elam in our lives as well. And then chapter 16, we're going to get into the exam that God is giving to people continues. He's still trying to get them out of second grade. We're going to see a quick little clip here about, I don't know if this one is actually copyrighted or not, but
God led his people out of Egypt and through the desert. He wanted them in the desert. He could have taken them along the coastal route, but he chose instead to lead them through the desert in order to test them. The desert is a place of testing because in the desert you cannot make it unless you rely completely on God. God didn't just want to see what his people believed and knew in their hearts. He wanted to see that belief put into action in their lives. He appeared as a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night. And after traveling for 2 days, God led the Israelites to a well. However, the water was bitter and they couldn't drink it. And the Israelites became angry, began to whine and grumble against Moses. So God told Moses to put a stick in the well, and the water became sweet. The place was named Marah, which means bitter, because the water was bitter, and because the Israelites had a bitter spirit. The Hebrew root of the word Marah also refers to deliberate, defiant disobedience. The Israelites failed their first test. They showed God what was in their hearts, and their hearts were bitter. But God still chose to provide for their needs anyway, and he showed them that they needed to rely on him to heal them of their bitterness, just as he turned the bitter water sweet. God then led them away from Marah, and they came to a place called Elim, where there were 12 wells and 70 palms. Later, the Israelites began to whine and grumble against Moses again. They wanted the food they had back in Egypt, and so God provided food for them. He He sent bread from heaven for them each morning, and every evening he sent flocks of quail through the camp. When the Israelites first saw the bread from heaven lying on the ground, they said, "What is it?" They named the bread manna, which means, "What is it?" The text says that the manna looked like thin flakes of frost, so you could say that God gave them frost flakes every morning, but God never gave them more than what they needed for the day, their daily bread. And when some of the Israelites tried to hoard the manna, it became infected with maggots. You see, they were trying to rely on their own cleverness rather than on God's daily provision. God then led the Israelites to another desert, where there was again no water, and people once again began to whine and grumble against Moses. Moses asked, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" And Moses complained about them to God, claiming they were about to stone him. So God told him to go hit a rock with his staff, and when Moses did so, water began.
And we're going to get to that more in the lesson. So a little review and a little preview of what we're going to talk about then today. Okay, so let's look at chapter 16 then, verses 1 through 3. Chuck Swindoll points out too that there is no spiritual gift of grumbling. Sometimes we like to think that. Well, that's my spiritual gift.
There is, but it's unspiritual.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
Yeah. So why doesn't somebody read verses 1 through 3 there?
They journeyed from Elam, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elam and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died at the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate the bread of full. For you have brought us up out of the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger."
Yeah, now that's a pretty 180-degree turn, isn't it? When you think how quickly they forgot what it was like in slavery.
You know, we built these bricks with straw, and they didn't have enough straw.
Yeah, I mean, and the Bible says, they cried out to God.
Get us out of here.
Yeah, and God heard them. He says, "I have heard the cry of my people." There's Swindoll's book too. He's got a song or poem called "The Grumblers." In country, town, or city, some people can be found who spend their lives in grumbling at everything around. Oh yes, they always grumble, no matter what we say, for these are chronic grumblers, and they grumble night and day. They grumble in the city, they grumble on the farm. They grumble at their neighbors, they think it is no harm. They grumble at their husbands, they grumble at their wives. They grumble at their children, and that's when the choir director my wife looked at me, he said, "But the grumbler never thrives. They grumble when it's raining, they grumble when it's dry, and if the crops are failing, they grumble and they sigh. They grumble at the prices and grumble when they're high. They grumble all the year round, and they grumble till they die. Oh, they grumble on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They grumble on Thursday too. Grumble on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They grumble the whole week through." There's another song that was in the kids' music called "The Poochie Lip," talking about Ahab when he didn't get the vineyard, remember? And the song goes, "The poochie lip will get you if you don't watch out. The poochie lip will get you if you sit and pout."
I like the Greek word used, talk about grumbling and disputing. It's gogutsu.
What was that?
Gogutsu is a Greek word that
Uh-huh.
describes grumbling or disputing.
I like
A lot of good bits of flow in there.
So that was a good little poem, and so Swindoll says, ouch. Pretty convicting. Okay. So this is a pattern, and when we think of our own lives, you know, we're probably not real far from that. So they had abundance, they were delivered from Egypt, but they had the expectation that this was going to be easy schmeezy. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, even at the beginning, when Moses came and said, yeah, you're going, we're going, I think Moses was a little shocked too, that it wasn't going to be that easy. And so they said, yeah, so after the first plague, they said, wait a minute. After the second plague, wait a minute. And so now they went 3 days to find water, and now they have 40 days and they run out of food. Well, you know, 3 days is about the max you can live without water. So I'm sure I mean, you can imagine it was tough. I mean, your kids are crying, you know, the nursing moms are probably dry. It was miserable. I think if I were in that place too, I'd say, God, where are you? You know? But then 40 days is about the max that you can go without food before you start cannibalizing your own muscle tissue. So we're going to see in a little bit about the split rock. But chapter 16, verses 4 through 8. Let somebody read that one.
Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord who gives you meat to eat in the evening, and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord.
Yeah. So it's interesting there that Aaron, Moses basically told them, hey, we're only human. You know, why are you complaining against us? God heard your murmurings and grumblings, and he's going to answer. God had no intention of letting them starve to death in the desert. Now, it took a while for them to figure that out, but he promised to take care of them. Remember at the very beginning too, I'm going to bring you into the promised land. Once again, it wasn't on their timetable. Someone has said you have either, you know, that you could have got there in about 40 days. Instead it took 40 years.
Had the Israelites already been told about that the seventh day was a day of rest? I mean, they hadn't gotten the Ten Commandments.
They haven't
yet.
gotten the Ten Commandments yet.
I mean, obviously
must have
that is
been.
what this is, he's telling them, that
That might have been kind of tradition just based on the creation. That might have been something, I don't think the Egyptians said, hey, you get Sunday off, or Saturday off, I mean, but, yeah, that's a good question.
It might have started from ahead of.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah, it started from the beginning of Genesis, that we don't have any record that I know of where Abraham is taking the Sabbath. But according to the chronicle that we have here, the Ten Commandments haven't been given yet, though, but you're right. So, we don't know.
But it's clear that the Lord didn't want them working on Sunday, so So he fed them twice.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's what we mean, that it was, yeah, it's kind of embedded. It doesn't say specifically, and Moses said, and by the way, you know, we're not gonna work on the Sabbath.
And he
He
didn't,
must have
they didn't
known.
seem to question the Lord.
No.
Why are you doing it that day? What's,
Yeah, well, some of them did, they thought, what do you mean, that's stupid, you know?
well, some of them tried to say it.
Right,
And
yeah.
it didn't work.
No. Remember, for those of you that remember the little cartoon strip, Little Abner, there was a little character called the Schmooze. And the Schmooze were food for the people in Dogpatch. And they would be whatever you wanted. If you wanted chicken, they'd turn into chicken. They'd hop in the frying pan and you'd cook them up. You know, this is really kind of piggybacking on Steve's sermon on Sunday, where he was talking about the manna, and there's a similar account in the book of Numbers, Numbers 11, which we'll look at as well. Well, we're going to see a little clip here. Got to switch our...
Oh, you're coming.
Oh yeah, thank you. Got to switch our source here.
Don't come out until the morning. God himself will provide bread.
He mentioned that too about coming on here in hospital, about how, you know, you can get sick of something day after day. You know, if you had oatmeal every day, he gave the analogy, Steve gave it about pizza, teenagers wanting pizza every day. Well, if you did have pizza every single day, you'd probably get sick of that too. I'm not sure if they really, you know, if it was made to get sick of, because it says that you could make it different ways. You could boil it, you could fry it, you could grind it into flour, you could make bread. It was like the schmooze of Little Abner, you know, whatever you wanted. We're not sure how it worked exactly. But the one thing that we know too is when it was all over, for 40 years, it stopped. As soon as they entered the promised land, it stopped happening. Okay.
It didn't happen as a snowstorm, though, did it? It happened as dew on the ground.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how accurate,
Yeah, it just, anyway.
And they also showed in there that it was the Sabbath that they were to rest
right,
and no work.
right.
So even before the Ten Commandments, they were resting on the seventh day.
Right. And we don't have, like I said, we don't have the details of how that was communicated. Because we don't have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph. It doesn't say that they celebrated the Sabbath, but it is, of course, still then, it was linked to the days of creation.
Right, exactly.
And that the reason we have the Sabbath is because on the seventh day God rested. And I've read that on the Oregon Trail, that the people that were devout and that they would stop on the Sabbath and not travel, that in the long run, they actually got farther and faster because their cattle could rest, they could kind of catch up. And the people that were just plowing on, we gotta get there, let's go. You know, they had the wagons break down, their oxen die, and so I don't know how all true that is, but I've read that.
Well, even on Sundays as a farmer, we didn't work on Sunday.
Yeah.
We didn't farm on Sunday. We took the day off.
Right?
Unless you're a dairy farmer.
Yeah, that's your dairy farmer, right?
Can't do that.
Yeah. The cows don't practice Sabbath.
No, they don't.
If you making milk every day, day to day.
The day I got married was on a Sunday, and married at 7 o'clock in the evening, and we couldn't go to the church until my dad had the cows milked.
Well, one of the girls in the neighborhood, her dad had to get ready for a wedding. Happened to be her wedding. She's the one that had to go to the barn and take care of the cows before the wedding. Before she could clean up and put on her wedding dress.
Right.
Thus say in verse 4, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. So that's why you see it coming down.
And it was a neat picture of all the kids running out like it's a snowstorm, you know.
Well, but the point was after a while that it didn't taste right
Yeah.
because they didn't have the garlic and the seasonings that they had in Egypt to add to their food.
But
So
I
they
think,
complained about that.
yeah. I think God made it though, so it would really be okay. You know.
Well, it was
yeah.
okay.
Right.
But it didn't have the taste.
Yeah. But
And
I
that's
think it
what
was
they
more
were
in their
complaining
heart.
about.
The problem was more in their heart than the manna itself.
Right.
Right.
But that was the complaint, was that they didn't have the garlic and the onions and the stuff that you can put in food or more flavor.
But wasn't it the idea that if they gathered too much, they were supposed to only gather for the day? They gathered more than that and tried to eat it, it didn't taste right.
Well, it
That was
was
supposed to be
spoiled.
Spoiled.
It spoiled quickly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Unless you got it on the 6th day, then you got it twice.
Right, but you were told. They
You're
were
told to do
that.
it. And then by miraculous means, God allowed it so it didn't rot.
Right, but other than that,
Right.
took off, yeah.
But the manna that they put in the, that Aaron saved, that stayed.
Right.
Because that was supposed to be a testimony as to what.
Right, that
God
God
did.
would provide, yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
it didn't.
and that should have been a miraculous thing that they should have recognized.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's not spoiled.
So verses 9 through 13, so the quails covered the camp. And one thing you don't think of that when they were showing in the video is somebody had to pluck all the feathers and clean them, gut them.
Yeah.
My first thought was watching where's the gun?
Yeah.
Get it out of them. And then I thought, wonder how they
Yeah.
kill them, to get them.
Ring their necks.
What?
Ring the necks.
Well, yeah, but you gotta get them down on.
Well, you catch
It
them.
said
Catch
they were just forced right down onto the ground.
You think they just sit there and wait for you to catch them?
Well,
Even chickens don't do that.
Well, we were able to do it
and
with
they still try to get away when you cut off their heads.
That's right.
Right.
You know, what's funny is that up north in Minnesota, there's guys that drive the four-wheelers down the trail. Every now and then they run into a grouse that's friendly and come up and land right on their shoulder on the
Oh,
back of the four-wheeler and ride with them for a ways. And they do it every day they came by. The grouse would come out and join them.
Now, passenger pigeons, which were once the most abundant bird in the United States, migratory bird, that the story about them was when they would migrate, it would darken the sun. It was so thick. And then they would land in the fields. The people went out with clubs and just clubbed them. They were such easy pickings. And maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, the passenger pigeons went from billions down to, there was one left in 1916 in a zoo in Cincinnati, and she died. They looked all over for some male, but they couldn't find it. I think today they could have probably backbred, got her genes and kept them alive. Anyways, off the subject a little bit. So, Aaron and Moses, like modern day pastors, they usually get the brunt of things in the church if something goes wrong. And rarely if something goes right. So when the manna came, the reason of course it's called manna is what we've been taught about.
What is
What is it?
What is it? So it's the same Hebrew word, I guess, as what is it? So what are you having for breakfast? What is it? That's what your kids used to say. What is this?
Yeah.
It's lentil stew. Oh.
Who's on first?
Yeah, who's that first? So it says like it was like hoarfrost. And like it said, like Miriam said there, it tastes like coriander seed. I'm not sure what coriander seed tastes like, but it's probably, probably pretty good tasting, I would assume. Now, in Joshua 5:12, it says the moment they crossed into the promised land, it stopped. Now they were going to eat all the good of the land that was already there for them. The vineyards, the fields of wheat, the fig trees, everything that was already there. They didn't need manna anymore, and it stopped. Now, they said they were going to collect an omer, and I looked that up, and that's about a gallon in volume. That's pretty good. I think that was per person.
Wow.
And that was going to last you for breakfast, second breakfast, lunch, supper, and snacks in between. So, right, and if you did keep it overnight, it was full of maggots the next morning. I'm sure there were a lot of flies around in that area anyways. So, and that analogy, of course, is our daily need of God's Word. And of course, the little devotional by Radio Bible Class, Our Daily Bread. Well, that's why it's called Our Daily Bread, because of the story about manna. That doesn't mean you don't have to, you should read twice as much on Friday, and you don't have to read on Saturday. Okay. So some did try, in chapter 16, verses 20 through to 24, some tried to go out and collect on the Sabbath, and that was not the thing to do. Moses got pretty ticked off, and God did too. That, this is real simple. And once again, people thinking in their own wisdom, oh, that doesn't make sense. I'm going to just go out and get it. It must be there. Well, it wasn't. And they were supposed to be resting that day anyways. So in Numbers 11, 6 through 9, it does say, so like the coriander seed idea, you could grind it, boil it, make cakes, angel food cake, I'm sure. And somebody look up, if somebody can get Nehemiah 9:15. And then somebody gets Psalm 78, 24 through 25. So Nehemiah 9:15, Psalm 78, 24 through 25.
So the Nehemiah one is, in their hunger you gave them bread from heaven, and in their thirst you brought them water from the rock. You told them to go in and take possession of the land you had sworn with uplifted hand to give them.
Yeah, so this is probably, centuries after the event. And they're still carrying that tradition on, that story on. They were to remind their children about the things that God had done for them. So bread from heaven. It wasn't, some people have tried to make it a natural thing, like there's some bush that maybe has, some kind of fruit on it or whatever, but that doesn't seem right. I mean, you have to feed, 2 million people. That's a lot of homers. So Psalm 78,
It kind of proves that God can do anything.
Right.
Nothing too hard.
right. Psalm 78,
Start with 23.
24 through 25.
Okay, talking about the doors of heaven, the 24, and he rained down manna upon them to eat, and gave them food from heaven. So it rained down. Man did eat the bread of angels, he sent them food in abundance. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he directed the south wind when he rained meat upon them like the dust, even winged fowl like the sand of the seas.
And so, this is probably a migratory flock of birds, and God changed the wind so it would blow them on to where the Israelites were. Now, Hebrews 9:4, if somebody get that one. Of course, this is, once again, written a long, long time after the event. So what happened to the manna? Hebrews 9:4.
It had the gold altar of incense, the ark of the covenant, covered with gold on all sides, and in which was a gold jar containing the manna, Aaron's staff that budded, and the tablets of the covenant.
So the three things that were put into the Ark of the Covenant when it was made was a container of manna, which wasn't rotting.
Okay, no maggots had eaten it up.
No maggot, yeah, so God preserved that. And then Aaron's rod that budded, we're gonna get to that later on. And then, of course, the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments wasn't a great big rock, it was probably, just something that he could hold in one hand. Small font.
It's written on both sides.
Could be, yeah.
I thought that's what it
Yeah. And of course, the first one, he broke. It shows him holding a great big one and showing it now, but that wouldn't have fit in the Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant wasn't that big. Even in Indiana Jones movies, it wasn't that big.
It's just in Psalm 78 connects it with the food of the angels,
Yeah,
which is probably what it was. They just decided to open the door and let some of it come down.
yeah. But that brings up the questions, do angels eat?
Ah,
Yeah.
thought about that.
Obviously,
Or is
we
that
can
just,
in the
or is that
garden,
just a phrase, that it was from heaven? I mean, I think angels, at times appearances, they will eat something.
Yeah.
But when they're masquerading as humans,
The book of Revelation, it talks about the fruit in the garden in heaven
yeah,
that we can eat. The fruit of the tree of life, and we can eat there because we're already in eternal life.
and angels are spirits. They don't have a body of flesh and blood.
Yeah.
I mean, they can take on the form, so it looks like that. It says they're, spirits, ministering spirits. So, that's a whole other topic.
Like those quail, they weren't migratory. Israel, they spent 40 years in an area they could have crossed in about 4 days. And they were a local flock that just kept showing up,
Yeah, now,
had multiplied.
and I'm not sure, I'll have to check that out. Was that a regular occurrence? I don't think it was. I think it was just for 30 days.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that it wasn't, that otherwise manna was the main staple. Now,
We went to where the dodo bird then, huh?
yeah, and the passenger pigeon, yeah. Well, I mean, and the thing about them coming out of their nose, I think that was just a reference, like, you're gonna get sick of that. I mean, you all remember in school when somebody would laugh, and they were just taking a drink of milk and it comes out their nose.
Yeah.
They got me in trouble at supper one time when we were kids growing up.
Yeah,
They cracked a funny when my brother was drinking,
yeah.
milk come out of his nose and all over his
Usually
plate
dads
and
weren't real
tail.
happy with that.
Mom wasn't happy with that.
No. Now, Now
My mom
Jesus,
did not happen, nobody does.
now Jesus says in John 6, he says, I am the bread of life. It's a clear reference to manna. Manna was symbolic of the true bread of Jesus. Let's look at John chapter 6. I think will kind of be a good ending part here. We were going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant too, but we'll hold off on that. So somebody read John 6, 50 through 51, and then John 6, 32 through 35, two separate ones. So John 6, 50, 51. This is a pretty, I think, important connection.
John 6, but here's the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world.
Okay, so making a clear analogy that Jesus is like the manna, it sustains us. Then 6, 32 through 35. Somebody got that one?
Jesus therefore said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. They said therefore to him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall not hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. That's 2:35.
Yeah. So pretty neat verse there about Jesus being the bread of life. Revelations 2 talks about the hidden manna, which is another reference in the New Testament to manna, which is interesting. I think it kind of close with that God's amazing faithfulness. In Deuteronomy 8, it read, their feet never swelled, they weren't sick. And, feet swelling, being sick is partly attributed to poor diet. God supplied, I think we have to remember that, God supplied all the vitamins, nutrients, amino acids needed in the manna. Everything was there. It couldn't have been just a natural plant.
And there wasn't any green vegetables or red vegetables?
No, there wasn't any, there wasn't lentil stew. And another case that's a little bit different than that, remember Ezekiel, God gave him a recipe for Ezekiel bread that was supposed to provide Ezekiel all the nutrients he needed. And of course, there's some knockoffs of that in the grocery store, Ezekiel bread. It's probably not quite the same. I haven't seen that at Coborn's. They could only keep it a day anyways, right? So.
Now this day over.
Yeah. So instead of an apple a day, keeps the doctor away. The manna a day keeps the doctor away. Okay, well, we'll pick it up there next week then. So thank you for coming, and see you hopefully next week. Won't be in storms. And watch the driveway.
Yeah, hopefully let it melt a little bit.
Yeah.
I know Patrick